Now, before we start this, I'm just gonna pop open a cold one. Alright. Hey y'all, so I'm not planning on making this the 200 sub special. We are still trying to figure out what to do for that. However, my last video, I said something like this. If this video does really well, as in if this video gets a little bit more than 50 likes, I will gladly make another top 10 list of Death Battle. And well, y'all kind of like crushed that goal. So, as I promised, today I'm going to give you the top 10 on some of the greatest episodes of Death Battle. There aren't going to be many rules on the list. It's just going to be if the episode's good, it'll probably be on the list. However, I'm going to make one rule and I'm not going to be including any Season 8 episodes. It's mostly because I just don't want to include any, and that it's too early to tell. But if I were to include, Heihachi vs. Geese would most definitely be on the list. And right before I get into this is all subjective as in my opinion, but you already knew that. So, without further ado, let's get into this list, shall we? Choosing the Season 4 episode is extremely tough, because I had to pick between either this or Sephiroth vs. Virgil. And the reason why is because they both share a lot of similar qualities. For example, both have really fun and good analysis of how to talk to each character that very well interest me. And both had some good jokes sprinkled throughout. But you might have asked, hey, why did you pick this one over Sephiroth vs. Virgil? When deciding between the two, there was a couple issues that plagued Sephiroth vs. Virgil, so I ultimately just ended up choosing this one. Now, to begin with, the start of the fight is actually great. The announcer is really good and very charismatic, and likes to commentate over the fight that's just, ooh, nice. And he just generally brings a lot to the fight itself. And the way that they introduce the characters is just great. And the sound design is really good. Not just like the track or like the hits, everything sounds nice. The voices for TJ and Balrog sound really good, and both definitely sound in character. And also, speaking of sound, the actual hits between the exchange sound great. For example, since TJ is more of a tactical fighter, he likes to do a lot of weaker hits that like to weaken Balrog. While every time when Balrog hits, it sounds like he's throwing everything behind it. And that, coupled with the animation, but we're gonna get to that later, makes this a really convincing fight. Now, I can't talk about sound design without bringing up the track that they used. I'm Back from Killer Instinct fits the fight perfectly, and it hypes up the match so much. And that's actually a pretty apt description of the fight. It's just pure, unadulterated hype. But now it's time to talk about the actual animation. The animation does a really good job on expressing how the characters actually fight. For example, in the analysis, they describe TJ as an outboxer, which, to break it down in simple terms, basically means he likes to wait for the opponent to attack him and then attack when they miss. While in Balrog's analysis, they described him as a slugger. And again, like in the animation, the choreography definitely helps this. TJ essentially littles Balrog down little by little, while Balrog tries to go with big money-winning moves. However, when TJ goes for it, he gets knocked down. And I adore how progressively over the fight, Balrog just gets more and more pissed. And it culminates in this really nice clash of fists between both Balrog and TJ, in which every time when TJ collides hit with Balrog, he shakes his hand off in visible pain. Couple this with the sound design and the floor cracking, really sells this impact. So I think I've pretty well discussed that the choreography is really good. It shows off that both of the fighters' characteristics and strengths. A couple last things before I actually get into the death is that I love the fist trails for both. This is more of a personal thing, but I love it when you got weapon trails in a game, because it gives a very clear indication on where the attack goes. And also, it just looks nice. Now this does lead into my one critique of the fight. Despite the fact that this is clearly Balrog's SF5 model, he has SF4 effects. I don't know why that's a thing, it just is. But it's a footnote when compared to everything else. Now after the fist exchange and Balrog outsmarting TJ, it leads to the death, which is really good. The way that the music builds up to TJ turning the fight around,
I ain't done!
Along with the line he drops, is great. And the announcer is just another thing to it. He gives so much energy to the death. And I adore when Balrog tries to defend himself, he gets his arm fucking broken. Along with the hit and the sound, it just sells that impact so much. And then we get the best part where TJ pulls the fighter out and does the best comeback. And now this is where I'm going to have my other complaint. It does linger on the last shot for just a little too long in my opinion. I do know why they did it though, it's so to build to the music, but I'm pretty sure you could have just cut a little too early. And the verdict is just really good. Now, this is one of the only this was a close fight scenarios that was actually pretty well close. It brings up numbers for both and show that they were practically identical. And for their verdict, they bring up real-world trends and theories of boxing, which is really nice and cool to learn about. So, yeah, it's really good. But you could say it was a killer video? No? Oh, okay, I guess I'll see myself out.
Worse than the goddamn Nintendo Switch!
There, that's your reason it's on here. Now, in all seriousness, this episode is really good. But why? Well, we still have like a good amount of time in the video, so I'll get into the reasons. Now, I'm going to say there's a lot in the video, but both the analysis in this video are really good. The geese cutaway was really good, however, I'm not a fan of how they sideline a really interesting character though. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of an issue. This and another one are like my only two critiques of the episode. It's an in media res fight, which basically means we don't see why they're fighting, which is cringe. However, everything else is really good. I like how when Akane is actually controlling Kiryu, she's a lot more tactical with him. For example, she tries to knock Dragon Zora down and use the Absolute Zero Cannon. And another thing I like about this death battle is that they actually interact with the environment. For example, in this scene, where Dragon Zora is just completely tanking Kiryu's beams, he basically uses this giant pole as just a melee weapon. And watching the fighters actually interact with the environment is pretty rare in a death battle. Oh, and speaking of unique stuff, the amount of abilities that they use is quite a lot. Like how Tommy uses Dragon Zora's just variety of weird abilities like the foot stomp, the blade, and a lot more. While Kiryu uses missiles, the Absolute Zero Cannon, and the electric blades. Oh yeah, and speaking of unique stuff, voice acting. Now I have absolutely zero idea on who they got to voice Akane, but what I do know is that the guy who voices Tommy Oliver is pretty good. He sounds something straight out of Power Rangers with the amount of just cheesy lines and the way he delivers it. Perfect.
Ah, nice work, Dragon Zord. Let's crush this tin can. Oh no, you don't.
And speaking of delivery, yeah, the interaction between the two are pretty good. Oh yeah, back to the fight. So it kinda got shot down, and this sets up for the hype as hell Godzilla comeback. The silence of the track following the intimidating walk and emphasized stomp of the Dragon Zord, it all culminates the roar, which, it's really impactful. And then Kiryu goes from tactical guy to just straight up brawler. It goes from someone who uses tactics to someone who's just a monster. This part really emphasizes the difference between weight and strength between the two. Now the sound design isn't as good as last spot, but the roars just definitely make up for it. Oh yeah, and speaking of sound, the music. Draconic Robotics, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, is hype as hell. In the actual track, it's constantly building towards something. And if you hit that amazing boom, thanks for the lead up. Followed up with the Power Ranger theme, which is great. And I like how when the death hits, it goes back to the first part of the track. Oh yeah, the death. Yeah, that's coming up. So after Tommy gets just completely dominated for that part, he calls in the other people and goes into his big boy form. And this is where the sound design gets into the good stuff. For example, a lot of the hits just have a lot of impact. And I like how Kiryu tries to go for his breath, he just gets completely smacked. And the next couple of parts are pretty good. And I like how, keeping with the weight, when Kiryu tries to essentially dodge the thing, Tommy uses his recovery as an opportunity for the big boy stab. And I like how just confident Tommy was for the stab.
Keep going, we've got this!
Oh yeah, and then it sets up for one of the coolest deaths. I absolutely adore the fact that Kiryu just pulls the blade towards him, and then essentially does the equivalent of,
You should have gone for the head.
It's pretty much that, as he proceeds to shoot him with the absolute zero cannon. And along with the sound design, it is sold so well thanks to the fact it literally went through Tommy into the buildings behind him. It was that powerful. And then he kills him with the roar. Oh, yeah, this is one of the best deaths. Now, the verdict is one of those, it was a close match, and then, like, the winner was, like, 49,000 times better than him.
Finding the victor here wasn't easy. Both have performed amazing feats of strength and durability, and both wielded massive arsenals of unbelievable devastation. 128 teratons of TNT.
That's, over 49,000 times more powerful.
And those are, like, my only other complaint of the episode. But at least the numbers actually agree with the verdict. They give numbers for both, demonstrate both, and show why one is very much better than the other. So, well, time to move on. Yeah, this is gonna be a long one, isn't it?
Scared them away. You're making me angry. You won't like me when I'm angry. Show me.
Number 8 is going to be Hulk vs. Broly Doomsday. If you honestly thought it was going to be Hulk vs. Broly, then you don't know me that well. Not to say Hulk vs. Broly is a bad episode. Quite the contrary. It's pretty good. But it doesn't hold a candle to this one. And speaking of other episodes, the Marvel vs. DC episode is really hard to pick. But the reason I chose this one was because, well, it's season 3. And I needed an episode, and plus, I just find this episode just better than the other two. Time to talk about, like, the main topic at hand. Now, both the analysis are pretty good. And I really love Doomsday's a lot. Most of the jokes in it are pretty good. Especially the one at the start that always cracks me up every time. It's this line.
The idea being each new clone would be stronger than the one before, thus covering millions of years of evolution in just a few decades.
That doesn't sound like science.
No, it doesn't.
The way Wiz delivers it is just hilarious to me. I don't know why. but I like how it plays by a good sequence of events for both of them. So the first half is pretty good. What else? What about the second half, though? It's also pretty good. Now, from here on out, if there's an episode between season 1 to 3, I'm going to give a lot of leniency to the technical issues, because it was in the show's very early stages. So Hulk's model looking really weird is just a side effect of this. So I'm going to be a bit lenient on it. Now, everything else is really good. If I had to describe this fight, it is pure power and metal. For example, the sound design is really good this time around. I have something to directly compare with, but the sound design in here sounds a lot more meaty and more weighty than, well, the other one. And to really put this in perspective, here's Hulk versus Broly. And here's Hulk versus Doomsday. Yeah, do you hear that difference of sound design? Like, I don't need to sit here and tell you that this is good sound design and every hit feels like a freight train. Like, I think you could tell by that. And another thing that helps sell this really good impact is the destruction that they do. Specifically the rubble. Every hit they do has a great amount of rubble that reflect off it. Like this scene. And unlike Hulk vs. Broly that does more celestial destruction, does it do it well? I don't know. But in here, it's a lot more local. Because unlike a planet or galaxy blowing up, a building falling down is something we can actually visualize. It helps us really see the amount of destruction that they're doing. Now obviously you can do celestial destruction pretty well, but the way they approached it wasn't very good. Now it's time to talk about the animation / the choreography. The choreography, it does a really good job of giving both characters doing cool stuff. At first it starts out a one-on-one fight, then Doomsday throws Hulk through a building and then he starts throwing cars at him. Hulk deflects it. Hulk uses this as an advantage to use the car boxing gloves, hits Doomsday so hard he goes to a building, does the thunderclap, Doomsday brings the building on him, and then he goes World Breaker, and then he dies. Everything nicely flows from one thing into another. But as you can see, the choreography gives both characters some cool stuff to do, and there's some nice little details sprinkled throughout. Like, for example, when Hulk did the thunderclap on Doomsday, it really messed him up. But then you could see a very subtle detail that he slowly adapted to it. Along with the great sound design, the thunderclap has a lot of impact, along with the, building come down on him. And speaking of sound, the music. Now, Ikari is good.
Not nearly as good as one track from later down the line, but we'll get to it.
It just doesn't fit the fight nearly as good as these tracks. Not to say it's bad, oh no, it's a certified hood classic, but still. But this fight, you're telling me this fight uses both Metal Gear Rising and Guilty Gear music? Hot Wind Blowing and Skies Should Be Higher is really good. They are as metal as I want. Not like grindcore or screamo, but power metal works wonders for monsters like these. And right before I get into the death, Hulk's line when he goes World Breaker is just great.
You break buildings good, but Hulk, break world!
I love how when Hulk is in World Breaker and he hits Doomsday, the hits sound so much more effective. And I like when Hulk finally gets Doomsday down a bit by breaking his hand. Doomsday uses his spikes in order to just get him off, which leads to death, which is really good. The way that Doomsday just impales Hulk with the spikes, followed with the meaty sound design and neon flashing lights, gives so much impact to the actual hit. And this all leads up to the just amazing death, which, if you're one of the 5 people who haven't seen it, I'm gonna play it. Yeah, it's pretty good. And I love the slight character detail of Doomsday just walking up to Hulk while cracking his knuckles. It's a nice little detail that shows that he's about to go all out for this final attack. And then he proceeds to beat the living shit out of Hulk. And the sound design helps it out so much with the blood on screen and each hit just sounding like he is throwing everything behind it. But thanks to Hulk's healing factor, he is somehow staying alive. And then Doomsday picks Hulk by the head, looks him dead in the eye, and makes sure that the last thing he sees and hears is his name. As he just wrenches his head off. He doesn't pull it off. No, he just full-on Mortal Kombat style rips that shit out. That is one of the best stats of the whole show. And, like, I don't think I need to explain why it's good. Like, I think you can make the judgment. And the analysis is really good.
Even though they say this cringe line.
He regularly fights foes with light speed capabilities, while that kind of speed is an extreme rarity in the Marvel Universe.
And it's a little bit longer of analysis, which I like a lot. And they bring in real-world science to the verdict, which is pretty cool. But they do make up headcanon for Hulk's healing factor, which is not cool, but it's not that big of a criticism, though. I'm not the kind of guy to say an episode bad just because they downplayed my favorite character. So, well, here on out, it's just going to be picks that are just pretty much to personal likeness, alright? So, moving on. Yo, why is it so low? The reason why it is so low is solely because I do not have that much of a personal connection to, nor do I like it as much as the next episodes. Now, with all that being said, this is a really good episode. Out of all the finales, this one feels like the finale the most. Now, it's not the best finale because we're going to get into that episode way later that's a lot better, but in terms of how finale-worthy feeling it is, this definitely trumps them all. At the start of the episode, you can just sense that this is not just an episode. This is going to be an event. And it's a pretty nice vibe, not gonna lie. And well, obviously, this is actually one of the most important episodes to the whole show. And I like how they go out of their way to mention what they're not going to be using. It's pretty cool. And I like how, another episode down the line, it starts off with a small beginning, then it transitions to their higher forms, and it's a nice little character study. Not a huge one, but one that's pretty good. Now let's not get into the battle. It's also really good. Now obviously if you aren't a DBZ abridged fan, you're gonna be super confused by the intro. Which I was, don't worry. I understand it, never watched abridged, but I understand the joke. Now everything else is, spoiler alert, really good. For one, both of their dynamics bounce off each other really well. And Superman, from the very little Justice League animated I've watched, he definitely seems in character. With lines like these...
Deja vu. Well, this might take a while. Hello, fight? Well, that's literally what I do.
Yeah, he seems like a really chill guy. However, he's just one half. Goku is also really good. In the analysis, they said something like this.
He's about to reach his maximum! This could be your last chance!
I want him to reach his maximum. I want to fight him when he's at his best.
And in the battle, they reflect this pretty well. Now, you've probably noticed that the animation looks very dated, to say the least. But like I said in the last section, I am going to completely disregard it. Fun factorino, this was the second ever 3D death battle. So yeah, I'm going to be a little lenient on it. And also, this is the longest death battle, which is kind of funny. And thanks to its long length, they are allowed to do so much stuff. Like Superman does pressure point combat, utilizes his position in order to get a better advantage, taking Goku out to a middle of nowhere, and using the sun as a vantage point. And he's just a fun character to watch. And Goku gets a lot of stuff as well. He gets his 3 forms, the Dragon Throat, the Sensu Bean, the Power Pole. I can go on and on and on. They just get to do a lot. And now speaking of which, the choreography, repeating myself like a broken record, also pretty good. Now the sound design compared to the other spots sounds pretty lackluster, but it still has some pretty good neato sound design. Especially after Goku goes Super Saiyan 3, every single hit he does sounds really nice and really impactful. And now, time to talk about the build up to the death. I like how for once when Goku finally gets the advantage over Superman, Superman uses his position in order to get to the sun quicker. And then Goku proceeds to charge himself up, and Superman does the same. And it leads to one of the most impactful deaths of the whole show. After Superman charges himself up, and Goku does the same, they both unleash their most powerful attack. And thanks to the sound design and hit, the planet blowing up has so much impact, and definitely hits you pretty hard. Like I said in the last section where Hulk vs. Broly really doesn't have good sound design on the planets blowing up, this one does. And it is used marvelously. And now, the verdict. Now, obviously they did mess up a lot of numbers for Goku, but I'm not here to judge who should have won or who should have lost.
Especially this image, it's probably just a typo, but just throwing it out there.
And I love how they keep throwing numbers for each character, to really sell the fact of who really won. And I like how, unlike the sequel, they use the ending note as something just to think about.
They are both ultimate heroes, solutions to daunting problems, and achievers of the impossible. The difference is at the core of their character. Goku has never been invincible. He has very clear limits and must overcome those limits to solve the problems at hand. That's the whole point. On the other hand, Superman's story is not about the fight to become the best, but of an immigrant facing the challenge of home versus heritage. After accepting his alien side, Superman has reached his full potential, which, under the endless power of the sun, is essentially limitless. In short, Superman is as strong as he needs to be. So, what happens when you pit a man with the power to break any limits against another who has no limits in the first place? Well, only one has limits to give at all.
So with that being said, time to move on.
Your castle is lost, vampire. No man can challenge my power.
But what is a man? A miserable pile of secrets.
Yeah, this is a really good episode. And before I get into this, this is one of the SF team's first episode. So yeah, they kind of hit it out of the park. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To start, the analysis for both of them are really fun and goes into the history pretty well for both. But that's not the highlight. The fight. Oh, the fight. Now, the start of the fight is really good. They managed to slot in the
What is a man?
line, and it's a nice setup to the death later, which, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, the first thing, and probably the weirdest thing I'm ever going to praise in this video, is the effects of the fight. It is so expressive and nice to look at. What I mean is that each of the fighters have a very nice effect that accompany both. And it's just really nice to look at. Now, another really expressive thing are the voice actors. As someone who's only seen the What is a Man meme and playing Ganondorf in Smash, these two sound really good. Speaking of the characters, another very little thing are the slight character details. Specifically Dracula. Him just brushing off the dust off his shoulder, and him just carelessly chucks the orbs back at Ganon when he shoots them at him. These little details help the fight stand out so much. Also, the choreography is very dynamic. It is a constant back and forth with Dracula and Ganon with their abilities. And I love how Dracula throughout the fight, it's just really obvious that he's just messing with him. While Dracula, every time he finally gets a hit on Ganondorf, he throws everything behind it. And now another thing before I get into like the actual transformation is that I love every time when the Ganondorf tries to use the Triforce power, it slowly gets worse. It's a nice way to convey just how powerful Dracula is. Now we can talk about that transformation scene. The twitching of Dracula's body, followed with Ganondorf's reaction, and this shot right here following it, it all adds up to a fantastic transformation. And then, in the choreography, it goes back to Dracula dominating again, and after getting smacked around a bit, Ganon goes into his, which is somehow better. The scream that Ganondorf lets out and the focus on the Triforce of Power really goes to show that it is actually painful to go into that. And I love how animalistic he is. Unlike Dracula, who can actually talk, the only thing he can muster out is a roar and a growl. It is such a nice little detail. And then it goes back to Ganondorf dominating the match again with some good sound design. Each hit with a sword that he does feels so impactful, along with weapon trails, just great. And then after this little bit, Dracula proceeds to drop a demonic nuke on him. And before it, he drops one of the single best lines of the whole fight.
I am no simple vampire. I am a god.
And I like when Ganondorf is trying to fight back with his Triforce, it just puts him in a worse position. And the scream that follows it, with the explosion, which also has a really good sound design, is just really great. And this leads to the death, which, can you guess it? Why yes, it is also really good.
You're right. You're not a man. You're a pig. Let me hear you squeal.
This one line right here still gives me chills to this day, even after 2 years of watching this. And then Dracula proceeds to donut Ganondorf and just wrench his body off as he proceeds to just violently drink his blood. This is one of the best deaths. And I love how at the start it's set up for the line, and I like how it holds on the long shot at the end. It really just lets the destruction just sink in. And again, like the other ones, the pulse analysis is really good. They highball Ganondorf to show that the most he can do is this, while Dracula can do this when lowballed. And the battery analogy definitely helps to convey their point really well. And before you ask, yes, this is the best Halloween episode by a wide margin.
You're pretty good.
You're pretty good.
Snake? Snake?
Jesus Christ, I have run out of things to say at this point. To begin with, this is one of the best from Season 2, which usually is peak death battle. Now for beginner's sake, we'll start off with the analysis. Both of these analyses are really funny. Maybe it's just my sense of humor, but I just crack up to like almost all the jokes in here. And it's a nice little piece on their history. And it's a joy to hear them try to explain the Metal Gear series. But, come on, are you going to be here to talk about the analyses or the fight? So let's just move on to that. Now let's start with a thing that this death battle has over a lot. It's more of a short story of sorts. Not to say any death battle has a story in it, because like all of them technically does, but this one is like structured around it. I can't really explain it well, but you just know it when you see it. Basically, both the characters are working towards a goal that isn't just kill the other person. It's, you gotta get the data first. I like it because it keeps the action quick and fast, while also putting very necessary times in between that let the action sink in. And these moments to breathe between each interaction between the two, they aren't just metaphorical stop signs for the pacing. You can still feel a sense of energy behind it. And it definitely elevates it. And as you can guess, the dialogue here is pretty good. The exchanges between Griff and Sam, and Snake and Otacon are really good. Both of them have good chemistry with each other. And just for the sake of finality, the voice acting is pretty good. Now it's time to talk about the actual fighting. This episode, along with another one down the line, is how you do a fist fight. However, unlike the other one that I mentioned, this is how you choreograph two experienced martial artists fighting. One thing this fight does really well is demonstrating the strength between both of them. For example, in the post-analysis, they said Snake had more hand-to-hand experience. And in the fight, you can very well see that every time when they go hand-in-hand, Snake is usually the dominating one in the fight. but they still manage to give a lot of stuff to Sam. Earlier they said that Sam is very good with a gun, and they managed to demonstrate this by him managing to shoot Snake. And fun fact, this is the only shot that they managed to do. And speaking of stuff, they both managed to sneak away. Snake uses his cardboard box as a distraction, Sam uses it to recover and get away. Now, it wouldn't be a section complete without me bringing up the sound design. Instead of having big meaty hits, each one sounds like very weak hits. Now, the reason why they're doing this is because since it's two highly skilled martial artists, they're both going to try to little each other down. After Snake gets badly hurt and Sam gets run away and regroup, this sets up for the amazing climax. I adore how they managed to put the goggles in. The way that he puts the goggles on and runs into the room with the sound effect is just nice. Especially the song that they managed to put with it. Divine Identity fits the climax so well. And Snake is right behind Sam looking over him with the solid eye. It's a near flawless shot. But wait, there's more. The next shot kinda do be as good. After they meet, they finally shoot each other, but since they're in a dark room, it illuminates the room for just a little bit. And Otacon's calling out for Snake. This entire little part is like the best thing of the fight. And then Sam accidentally shoots out the windows, putting the light into the room. And then we get this amazing suplex from Snake. And what precedes this is the most intense knife fight of the entire show. It's a constant back and forth between Snake and Sam, with Sam constantly messing up Snake. However, thanks to Snake's CQC training, Snake was able to beat Sam through raw skill. And I adore how they use the taser knife as mentioned earlier in the analysis. And I like how it just holds on Sam's body to really let it sink in. That is one thing that this fight does really well, is letting the action sink in. And it works near flawlessly for this death. It's not that brutal, but the impact of it just sells it. And him lighting the cigar, with him catching the flash drive midair, followed up by the line he says, that was a reference from earlier, it just all makes this a great scene. Now, the post-analysis is again good, it references the fight pretty well, to go show the difference between the two, and it's just a fun post-analysis. Oh yeah, and speaking of computer data, yeah, this is one where I'm going to definitely get slaughtered for. I feel like I am one of 4 people who unironically love this episode. Now, to start, both the analysis are really good. Shocking, am I right? The only thing I do take issue with is in Ultron section where they say this.
And he is frequently defeated by computer viruses that can attack his AI directly.
And then they followed up with this.
The only time Ultron was ever defeated by a virus was one specifically designed to bypass his defenses and leave him vulnerable to attack from the future and a bunch of other complicated stuff.
I'm just going to directly quote Nim and just say, which one is it? But one weird dialogue isn't going to make everything bad. Because both of these characters, just learning about them are like the most interesting thing ever. And I love the cutaways in this one as well. Especially the one where Wiz is nerding out over the laser. And Boomstick's just like, okay, move on, nerd. And both of these just have interesting abilities to learn about. I do like how they do distinguish comics Ultron from movie Ultron. And it's not just put in those one little boxes things in the corner. But that's just me. So, first half good. I think you can guess the quality of the second half. Now to start, they do use a mixture of both comics and movie Ultron. Which is sort of contradicting. But I'm fine with it because I am one of the 3 people who unironically like movie Ultron. And whoever did the voice did a really banging job. However, we can't talk about voice acting without talking about Sigma's. He gets his original voice actor, or at least it's theorized to be his original voice actor, and he does an absolute banger job with it. And the exchanges between the two are just great. Both are just shit-talking the other, while also simultaneously boosting themselves up. It's a nice way to simulate their egotistical ways. Now, we can't talk about voice acting without talking about the sound design. Instead of having the hits feel meaty and weighty, they have a very metal hitting metal feel. Like you can just hear the metal hitting each other. Now another sound segue into the music. As I teased earlier, this is one of the 2 tracks that I consider one of the best tracks of all of Death Battle. But it's good for wildly different reasons than the other. The track Infection Perfection is really good, as you can tell. But let me explain why. So first, the lyrics are really good matching with the characters' personalities. It managed to demonstrate their extremely egotistical and just maniacal ways. But also managed to give away a very competent and like, if you get in my way, you are going to be sort of vibe. Especially with the very robotic and just metally sound to it. It really sells these 2 really well. And this doesn't just work as a battle track. Like, on my way to school, this and like 2 other tracks are like my main thing I blast onto my car. Am I a dick for doing it? Yes. But am I happy for doing it? Also yes. Jesus Christ, I've been talking 2 minutes, I haven't even talked about the fight. But back on the main topic, the actual fight part of the fight. Now this fight is a very dynamic fight. Not just the abilities, but they just do a lot of other stuff. For example, at the start, it starts off as an army fight. And there are like 2 other fights that even do that. And it does it really well. Especially the start where Sigma just lasers through one. It really goes to show just the difference between an Ultron bot and the Ultron himself. But they do interact with the environment. Ultron pushes Sigma up against this thing right here, I don't know what it's called. And they just interact with a bunch of stuff. However, Ultron doesn't do much outside of, lasers. But I think it was done just to give Sigma some stuff to do. Like he gets the teleportation, the floating hammer, obviously the sword, lasers as well, and a little bit more. Oh yeah, and did I mention this all took place in the air? And the sound design right here of Ultron just blasting him to next week sounds really good. It really sold that blast really well. Oh yeah, and when Sigma slammed against his wall, and this little shot right here, matched with the music, is sold really well. Along with Ultron's line. Now here's another thing I do take a slight big issues with. It went from Sigma standing up to him on the ground. And I know this because there was a shot taken out. Which, can you guess it? Yes, it's cringe. And Sigma's line right here is like one of the best things delivered.
I'll tear out your circuits and bathe in your oil.
I like how Sigma gives Ultron a taste of his own medicine by pushing him back into the same wall. It's just a nice little contrast I like. Oh yeah, and then we get a motherfucking kaiju fight. So already, it has a lot of stuff going for it. And then this leads up to the Great Death, which, hot take, is really good. For some reason, I absolutely adore Sigma's death cry, because it sounds like Sigma's life is just getting ripped away in front of him. Along with the sound effect of the little like internet thingies, and the build up, all of it just combines to a really solid death.
What's this? Everything belongs to me.
Now, just for completion's sake, the verdict. It's pretty good. I do like how they essentially just said, like, he basically Sigma'd a whole race of Sigmas, which, thinking about it, doesn't make any sense. But it's a cool line, and they really do demonstrate the just sheer difference between the two.
You jump good.
Oh, thank you.
So you want to hear something funny about this episode? The guy who animated this was joking around with the idea of animating a whole episode by himself. With results like these, can we get that more, please? Nah, I'm joking. I'm not gonna ask to do that. But in all seriousness, this is a actual masterpiece. To start, both of these analyses are really, really good. They managed to make a dad joke about anime dads work. That's just how good the analysis is. So, first half, good. second half time. My only complaint about this episode is a very tiny continuity error. When I can count the amount of negatives on one hand, you already know that this episode is going to be a good one. Let's start off with the elephant in the room, the look. The fact that this only takes place in one area helps out so much. The reason why is because if it takes place in one area, that means you have to draw the background less, which means you can have more fighting, and oh boy, don't worry, we'll get to that. And the background isn't just a static background that never changes. Oh no, it's quite dynamic. And speaking of interacting with the environment, the actual swords that they use. Holy shit, this is one of the only episodes where the weapons they use actually feel like sharp objects. They don't feel like blunt sticks. They feel like these are literal weapons. Let's start off with the sound design, because that's obviously the big selling point of this video. Like I mentioned in the last section, you can't just put a loud sound over this. You have to make the sound feel metally, and I know that sounds really weird, but you'll get that in a second. And fun factorino, they only hit each other 5 times. And the hits they do feel, holy shit, they got a lot of impact. Now before I get into the actual choreography and the other good stuff, the music in here is really good. Not nearly as good as Infection Perfection or the next one, but it's still good. And speaking of where they get hit, the way that clothing dictates the fight is really good. It goes from Jack and Afro fully clothed up and with their other stuff like a cigarette and a hat. Then it goes to Jack getting his hat taken off with Afro throwing a cigarette at him. And after a bit, Jack gets completely cut up. And this puts him in a rage that makes him put a lot of force behind one attack. And god damn it, that one attack had a lot of impact behind it. Now the clothing definitely nicely segues into the choreography. Even though the clothing dictates the pacing of the fight, both of their variety of skills and traits are definitely well conveyed as well. Since they characterize Afro as a dirty fighter, it makes sense that he's going to use his cigarette as an advantage. But since Jack has dealt with this before, he goes on the defensive. And he perfectly defends against it, and then he goes on the offensive, which then devolves into him wildly swinging. And Afro uses this to his advantage. And then after Jack jumps, we get this actually really good pace into comedy.
Huh, you jump good. Oh, thank you.
This again shows how much of a dirty fighter Afro is, while also characterizing Jack as very naive. And this leads to both of them getting their shirt ripped off, which again, this is such a tiny detail, but the fact that Jack only has 1 strike on Afro, while he has about 5 cuts on him, it is again showing off their personality. And then again, Afro using his mind decides to knock off Jack's sword, but then he does the same, which leads to this amazing moment where Afro's sword just completely cuts off the bridge. And I adore the way that the fog is used. It shows that Afro is ascending upward, while Jack is descending downward. It is such a minute detail, like the chest strikes earlier, but it adds so much. And then this leads to the most suspenseful climax. After Jack gets knocked down on the waterfall, he sees Afro descending through the reflection on the water, and this shot right here is one of the most tense buildups ever. And then we see Jack's arm completely cut off. And that followed up with his yell. Oh, yeah. Ooh, really good. But then, Afro, we only see his shoulders with a little bit of blood building up, and then it is revealed that both of his arms got cut off. Again, followed up with that yell. This one, the next one, and Sam versus a snake all have the best build-up. But this one has the best death of the 3. And then we get this part where Jack stands up with only 1 arm and just Judgment cuts him. And like I said earlier, with the very tiny continuity error, it shows up, but it's not even that bad. And you don't even notice it with just the amazing ending shot. The first one. The second one definitely takes you out a bit, but as a giant Samurai Jack fan, it's really good. Now, just for the sake of finality, the verdict's good. It accurately represents the data from the actual battle. So now, moving on.
I am here!
I'm gonna be honest with you, my expectations with this episode were very, very low. But then the episode came out. Safe to say it kinda exceeded my expectations, just a little bit. Now, to start the analysis. Some of the best. They reflect off each other really well, have a nice sense of flow, and have a good amount of respect to these two. And I like how the ending bends an inspiration for the next generation of heroes, for both their stories. But I will say, on the YouTube version, there's a lot of stuff in specifically All Might section that got cut out due to copyright. But that's not how I remember it, so it's not going to affect this episode at all. Now it's the part you want, which is where I get to talk about the fighting section. For one, the character dynamic here is actually amazing. These two from the get-go have a sense of friendship with each other, and that is something very few death battles can replicate. Really shitty example, but it's quite literally the fight example of this.
You're breathtaking!
And the arm wrestling bit is just something else. It builds to the dynamic of the two, and it's just a fun section all around. Now, obviously, I don't know Naruto or My Hero that well, but what I can say is the voice actors for both Guy and All Might are really good. And the sound design is just also really great. The weaker hits do feel weaker, but the big hits, oh boy do they hit. For example, All Might's Texas Smash has more impact than a lot of hits in modern death battles. Now, time to build up to the one track that I've been touting as one of the best in the entire series, Mighty. Oh, hell yes, Mighty. To quote Nemesis directly, Mighty is essentially what happens when you let Theirwolf and Brandon just collaborate and make a banger soundtrack. And like Infection Perfection with the lyrics, not only does it solidify it as a very inspirational track, but the lyrics are just fun to listen to. And again, like Infection Perfection, this piece sounds great on its own. And there's so many points that are just great. However, we're getting a little off topic. This fight does a great job on demonstrating both of what they can do very well. All Might is a slugger, so most of his attacks are going to have a lot of wind up and wind down, but hit really hard. So he's not going to be able to get like his Texas Smashes out that often. And hell, all of his other creative uses of smashes are really good. But here's the thing, my guy bounces off this really well since he's more of a martial artist. Sorry, correction, more of a technical martial artist. He fights with finesse and technique. And this is demonstrated really well, because each hit he does feels like a calculated move. It sounds like he's trying to weaken All Might down so we can ready him up for a big punch. The frame rate can get a little weird, but that is not even noticeable to me. And this shot right here where they're exchanging hits and my guy's just dodging him, while All Might finally uses a little bit of brain and catches one of his attacks and just starts going ham on him. Like, all of these attacks just feel great. But then we go into the gates, which really amp this up.
You're splendid, but I'll show you exactly how hard I've worked. 6 Gate of Joy, open!
With All Might being the offensive, while my guy is on the defensive, it mixes it up by having both the roles messed around. And my guy uses New Hampshire Smash as sort of a smokescreen. And then he proceeds to essentially grab him and just start messing him up again. And then we get this nice range battle, which no one was expecting. This fight just gets super creative with so many different things. And I love the reference to One Punch Man with this little hand-drawn bit right here. And then we get the daytime tiger scene, which is really good as well. All Might catching the tiger, then pushing him against his fang, while proceeding to grab it, and Might Guy himself then does one of the most impactful hits of the entire show.
You wanted my best? Here it is! United States of Smash!
And the skills represented very well. It left a whole ass crater. This is one of those badass moments in Death Battle. Oh wait, and then we still got the blast bit, which is really good. Followed up with Guy's line is one of those chilling moments.
Never give up. 8th Gate of Death, open.
And then it kicks up to that fucking guitar riff. With the music getting more intense, and Might Guy turning into Night Guy, All Might looks it down and just says, bring it on. And with the music getting more intense and they start approaching each other. And I love the morbid irony how it started with All Might being the one on the offensive and Guy on the offensive. It switches the roles around. This is one of the best build-ups to a death. Just period. And I know, yes, the death is a little weak, but honestly, the build-up alone sells it. This gives you pump and shield at the same time, which is very commendable. And the post-analysis is one of the best of the series. They deliberately overestimate All Might by a wide margin, but then they were still like, yes, Night Guy still had a lot of advantages, especially in Night Guy form. And it's just this episode. Now, you might ask why I'm not being a lot more general. I may or may not be saving this episode for a future video. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But before we get into the cream of the crop, we gotta do the honorable mentions. We are going to speed round all of these. Sephiroth vs. Virgil almost made the list. However, it was held back by this really stupid Virgil downplay. They kind of messed up a giant number for Sephiroth, and that's kind of cringe, but it's not that big. And it just gave TJ vs. Balrog a slight leg up. And also, Virgil's model is really fat, and the death has one tiny issue. But other than that, really great. Chuck Norris vs. Segata, great episode. The verdict is not nearly as long, which I don't like. And honestly, I just couldn't put this one on the list. But the impact of everything just sells it very much. Kirby vs. Boo. This episode has so much nostalgia for me. And honestly, this almost made the list as well. But in all honesty, rewatching it, I don't know. There's something odd that just doesn't click with me. Iron Man vs. Lex. It got slightly beat out by Doomsday vs. Hulk. But it does hold a consolation prize for the best ending line ever. And the build up to the death is something commendable. Ghost Rider vs. Lobo. Same story, but it was a season 6 episode and I used a lot. And honestly, it can get very boring at times, but it's still an amazing episode. Dante vs. Bayonetta. If it weren't for Doomsday vs. Hulk again, this would have also made the list. And a consolation prize goes to the best season premiere episode. It's a really good one. Wolverine vs. Raiden. Only reason it didn't get on was because of my pure, unadulterated bias towards Wolverine. Mostly because I just had a bad memory of it. But in all honesty, rewatching it, this is one of the best episodes. And there's a couple lines that devolve into explaining their abilities, which I'm not a big fan of. But not a big deal. Now finally, Beerus vs. Sailor Galaxia. The only reason it didn't make this list was because Toei, for some fucking reason, was like, hey, you know that really good episode from season 7 that's the best episode, mind you? Hey, let's take that away. Why? Fuck you. Now, after we got our diapers back on, time to move on to the best of the best. The episode that quite literally changed my life. Now, after all of that, what episode can even top the last couple ones? Well, that's a very simple solution. Making an episode that not only makes me fall in love with Death Battle, got me into a series I hold very close to my heart, and not joking, one of my most favorite YouTube videos ever created. Now, obviously, yes, my nostalgia for this is very high, because I watched this shit when I was in 3rd grade, which saying that out loud makes me realize I am old. But even at the time, I wasn't super into Death Battle. Like, I liked it, I tuned in every few episodes, but this one episode, like, I was consistently making sure I could find this episode. Like, the moment it was announced, I was like, alright, let's see when it comes out. I was waiting so patiently for it, so when it finally came out, I felt fully satisfied. And well, obviously, it still holds up. And not only introducing me to the Godzilla series, but kaiju films altogether. Now, with that emotional talk out of the way, let's actually talk about the objective side of the video. Now, the analyses are some of the best in the series, go figure. But I do like how it plays of a collection of just the weirdest shit that they've been through. I like how it goes from Godzilla being the destroyer to the protector of Earth, and then Gamera goes from the protector of Earth to the destroyer of Earth. And unironically, this is one of the funniest ones ever. Like, I love how in the Gamera section, Boomstick goes from what the fuck to hell yeah. And they just get great lines, both of them together. Now it's time for the part you want, the fight. Now, like in Goku vs. Superman, this is a season 2 episode, so I'm going to give it a lot of leniency. But even then, it still holds up really well. Because ironically enough, the sluggish movements definitely represent the Godzilla Heisei era. And that is so fucking hilarious to me. But the start of the fight is really in character. Godzilla tearing shit down, and then Gamera comes in and is like, no, don't do that. It's just great. Now, another thing that this fight does well, the roars. I know, yes, that sounds like a really weird and probably non-existent compliment, but like, they just sound great. And the use of them are also great. What if I were to tell you that this fight, because of the sluggish movement, makes each hit feel better, thanks to the god tier sound design from the hits. Mix it with what I said with the roars, and again with the sluggish movement, and you got a kaiju fight very reminiscent of the Heisei days. And speaking of sound design, the buildings falling down sound really nice. Anything with hitting sounds just sounds good, from the aforementioned buildings falling down to the abilities they use. They all sound magnificent. And like an earlier pick on this list, the rubble in this fight help convey the power so well. And the context of the fight also helps you visualize this. That's just a side effect of, well, it being a kaiju fight. Another thing this fight does really well is the characterization of these kaijus. For example, Gamera is described as being a very tactical fighter, so right off the get-go, he tries to use a little bit of tactics to fight Godzilla, with him throwing a buildings at him sitting in a shell while he holds in the fire, and taking to the air when Godzilla can't find him right there. And well, taking him to space. And Godzilla also is represented pretty well, with him being a very sluggish brute. And the way the abilities bounce off each other is really good. For example, Godzilla's atomic breath burns a lot of the city around and sets off a whole wildfire, but again, Gamera sucks it up and will shoots it back at him. Now let's go back to the orbit real quick. I like how when Godzilla's in orbit, he's just trying to jump around because he's never experienced it before. It's such a tiny detail, but it adds so much to the fight. But the next part is also really good. Gamera trying to take him to the ground, but the lightning is going into Godzilla's spike, and I love the build up to this part. The way that Gamera is showing to be hurt by it, and Godzilla readying something up, and then you get that magnificent EMP. It is basically just a better version of Thunderclap from Hulk vs. Doomsday. Again, with the Gamera details, he attempted to try to get back on balance, but failed regardless. And then we get into the great part known as the C part, which gives us a moment to breathe, which after the two sluggishly exchange a bit, Godzilla just rips Gamera's arms open in the most brutal way possible, and then we get this tense moment where Gamera starts charging himself up, and Godzilla raises his, his atomic breath up, and then we see Godzilla just get absolutely disintegrated by the bridge behind him getting completely disintegrated along with him. And this sets up for one of the best fake outs ever. Obviously, we just stated why it works very well as just death, so the next part's also pretty good. We get a very false sense of security of Gamera letting out a sigh and no music being played. And then Godzilla rises from the sea very menacingly. And when I saw this, I was like, yo! And then Godzilla picks Gamera up, and I never noticed this, but Gamera tries to do the self-destruct, but Godzilla says nah B, and just throws him up and does the better atomic breath. And oh boy, it's also very tense. The way that it is slowly but surely just sending him upward, along with the sound, it's like, will it break? But then it finally breaks and we get this nice double shot of it. And then Gamera just fucking explodes. And then, like always a kaiju fight, Godzilla ends it off with his signature roar. And along with the Godzilla 2014 theme, which is really good, it is very effective on how it delivers it. And it also does a really good job of just displaying the sheer power that Godzilla has. Now, there are many parts of this fight where nothing goes on and it just lets the fight sink in. And this is so it can let the destruction sink in. Along with the very small scale destruction, this definitely is a very immersive fight. And just for the sake of finality, the verdict. It's good. There was no way in hell after this part.
Plus, while Gamera tanked a city-busting nuke and almost died, Godzilla tanked a similar explosion from a meteorite and didn't even flinch.
That Gamera had a slim of a possibility to win. I'm going to repeat myself like a broken record, but this episode is something else. So, to send off, let's hear that iconic roar one last time. Now, if you made it to the end of the video, congrats. You managed to sit down and listen to a 16-year-old rant about a dumb internet series that I like very much. Now, this video, while it wasn't hard per se, it was extremely long. I've had to delay this video like a week because 1, started school, and I grossly underestimated it, and 2, I am lazy as hell. Now, if you saw a death battle that you liked and I didn't mention it, please feel free to mention it in the comments. Because like a wise man once said, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And feel free to have an opinion. And the same goes for if you disagree with any of my takes. Now you might ask, where are the season 8 episodes?
Cough cough, Reverse Flash versus Goku Black.
It is because I wrote and recorded this a month ago. And I am lazy as hell. But let's move on. Now, one thing that I'm now going to start doing is plugging our Discord. If you want to, like, let's say just talk about random matchups, or talk about death battle episodes, then hell yeah, join our server. And if you really liked my video, you can subscribe. But if you don't want to, then it's okay. Now, thankfully, the next video is not going to be one this long, and it's going to probably be a third of this video in terms of length, but it'll definitely be good. Now, I'm extremely tired, so I'm just gonna go to bed, so I hope you had fun watching this video, and now I'm gonna go take a nap.